moment, we're missing Cindy and Megan. So we'll call our budget workshop to order. Cindy Gardner and Cindy Maynard and Megan Gardner will be joining us shortly. And the first item on our agenda tonight is to review the letter that we all received, the email we all received in regard to the pool.
So do you guys want to talk about it, or would you like me just to what was requested is I just go through the rationale for it?
Yeah.
But
I think, Sophie, from my perspective, what I was mostly interested in was having a response to the suggestion that the citizen had that we not make a decision now and wait until July. And I'm sure that creates lots of complications. So I'd just like to get that kind of information out.
Sure. So waiting until July has a couple of complications. The first one is that it would mean that we would be approving a budget that has about $30,000 in it that we wouldn't, that we know we wouldn't be using. But we can, that's a council. The logistics on the ground is that if we wait until July to make a decision, it's going to take at minimum, even if we do the interviews, it's going to take me at least 2.5 weeks to bring people on board and train them to be able to work at the pool. So now you're looking at mid-July. And then we've got that cuts us down to about a 4 to 5 week season with the pool. So the things about July that I understand, I truly understand the desire to have the pool open. And part of the issue though is truly around how to safely have our employees there, because what has been suggested by Department of Labor is it just doesn't make sense. And so if we want to open the pool, or if we stay in this limbo, it means devoting a whole lot of existing staff time to trying to figure out how to do it. Talking with Jeff, and he can correct me if I'm wrong, there doesn't seem to be a lot of movement in relaxing the guidelines for July at this point, that you're still looking at maintaining 6 feet of social distance. You're still looking at minimum of 50 people. When we look at 6 feet of distance, and assume people need to be touching in the pool, you're talking about like 25 people that could physically be in the pool at any one time. So there are lots of logistics around sanitation and bringing people on board, because we're not going to be doing just we would have to do a lot more than just regular training. Jeff has informed me that while Department of Labor is telling us that it would be perfectly acceptable to use a pole to get people out and wait for EMS to arrive, that number one, there are lots of issues with that. And number two, the falling back on EMS for rescue in a subsurface environment is not anything that we're trained to do. So we would have to train regardless if that was the plan. Lifeguards are normally trained to do that, but they don't have protective equipment is the issue. Have
Sophie,
I helped?
Yeah, I was asked another question too about the pool, and it was, instead of opening the pool, if we keep the pool running in the summer, as I'm assuming that we have to keep it clean and the water in it and everything, is it possible for people, family groups or groups of 10 or whatever, to rent the pool still with a lifeguard? So that was another question, was, if the pool is up and running, can we rent it for an hour or 2 hours with a lifeguard? And I don't know.
Yeah. So the plan is not to keep it up and running. The plan is to kind of exercise it, clean it out, do the things to make sure that it's safe for the next winter, and then drop the water level significantly. The issue that you have, so is it possible to do that? Yeah. But in doing that, I would have to spend quite a bit of money to keep it going, and close to $3,000 to circulate the pumps just to keep it where it needs to be. You still have to bring in the lifeguard. We would still have to figure out how to deal with the Department of Labor. We call Bureau of Labor Standards. They're the ones that actually regulate us, Cheryl, as a public employer. And the question I asked was, or had asked was, there is no specific OSHA guideline regarding lifeguards and COVID-19. How are you going to interpret the general duty clause, which is the catch-all that says an employer has a general duty to provide a safe working environment? And the person's response to us was, you are really thinking that you could have lifeguards work in this environment? So it tells us that there's an awful lot of work to do. Jeff, Mitch, and I mean, it would be much easier to just open the pool. We just can't figure out how to do it in a reasonable way.
I would say that, I understand the concerns of both the resident who emailed us, and also I believe that there was some talk in the comments on the Facebook Live from our last meeting about it. I understand that if folks have younger children, then their non-pool swimming options aren't always possible for little kids. I understand that if you have teenagers, it's easier to corral them in the pool area than have them wander around town and do stuff that might be unsafe, unsupervised. I understand all those concerns, and as a parent, I sympathize with them. But the guidelines, I can't imagine this, the question of, well, can't we just wait till July? I cannot imagine this scenario changing significantly enough for us to be able to maintain a safe and sanitary environment in that pool area by July. I mean, the state is wrestling with whether they'll be able to open schools in September. How are we expecting that things will change enough by July that we could even promise safety to our residents? And then furthermore, I mean, I worked as a lifeguard in college. I can't imagine how you do that job if you're not supposed to get within 6 feet of people. And I don't know that, I don't know that I could have stood on the side of the pool with a pole and said, gee, I hope this works out and that EMS gets here soon, because I can't touch this person. So I wouldn't want to put staff in that position either. That could be traumatic to have to experience that. So I understand residents' concerns, and I don't know what I'm going to do with my kid this summer. Maybe a sprinkler in the lawn, but I just don't think it's safe.
Right.
After I read that, I went and did some investigating, and the recommendations, even if it were a pool, a municipal pool, public pool was to open, is that you would have additional staff that would be monitoring whether people who are not in the pool were 6 feet apart from one another. And we don't have a budget for additional staff. We have someone who takes tickets inside the house, inside the building, but that the recommendations were basically more staff to assist with cleaning and more staff for protecting and sort of monitoring people's behavior. Another thing I read talked about that municipal pools could have a time stamp so people could make an appointment to come, and that would be a way that you would identify, just as right now they're doing in supermarkets where they have a monitor. Again, that's a cost of having someone stand outside and say only this many people can go in. That pools would do it by having a time that people could come, but then you'd also have to escort them to be gone so that someone else could come in. And our pool is not designed for that kind of use, nor do we have the budget to manage. And those things are described as a way to keep the staff and the residents or guests safe. And I understand it was a wonderful thing when my kids were little to be able to walk up to the pool. And I'm concerned. Karen Frankor, who's my neighbor who runs an outdoor business, she expressed concern that without people going to the pool, that there might be people the kids venturing towards the river, which is,
Yeah.
we don't have lifeguards, and that, you know, that put, I said, well, we don't have lifeguards, but she said she was just concerned for the safety of what people will do when they don't have their regular place to recreate that's safe. So I'm glad that our citizens are contacting us with their concerns, and yet I couldn't come up with a way to be more supportive of opening it. I think that Sophie's cautions make a lot of
Would you
sense.
try 'em again?
Do we have any sense for what communities in our area are doing with their pools?
I think Mitch does.
Currently, I believe I've heard that Bangor is going to try to open, but they're still wrestling with how to do that. Brewer is up in the air and has called me a couple times to ask. Statewide, it's some are, some aren't, depending upon where they are. And all wrestling with the same challenges is how do we do this within a budget and that sort of thing. So, and as we go here, people are making those decisions, that with other things, a lot of their programming as well, so.
Augusta is closing their pools. Like they made a decision to close already, I think.
Sophie, may I add a business comment in there as well?
Yeah, can I just add, just Hamden, what we're hearing from Hamden, that's an indoor pool, and they're setting it up for lap swim, and they're setting it up so that people shower outdoors, go directly in to the pool, do their lap swimming, and leave, correct? And that's a question, Mitch.
Yes, that's what I've heard, that's how they were going to approach it. And, you know, some communities are looking at these things. I mean, it's a operation by itself, and they are lap swim only. So it's a little bit easier to control that 6 foot distance in that regard. And it is a facility that is staffed as a pool all the time year round. So a little different than what we have.
Yep.
If I may, again, just something that hasn't been mentioned yet is that DECD, Department of Economic Community Development, who is setting all the, you know, the guidelines, has allowed or is allowing lodging establishments to open June 1st for in-state and July 1st for, you know, for out-of-state. But they're the condition on that is all of their pools have to be closed. They're not allowing the pools at the hotels to be open. And there is no movement on that changing anytime in the foreseeable future. So one of the concerns I would have is that if the hotels that have pools aren't opening them, is that going to put more pressure on a municipal pool from people who are staying at lodging establishments as well? Just again, something to at least think about. And I do believe Mitch's world, but my prediction is a lot of these communities are being, you know, very under a lot of pressure to open these pools. My prediction is that they may open, but I don't know how long they'll stay open before there's issues that they can't control and they have to make decisions to, you know, to close them, similar to what happened with playgrounds. A lot of people had them open, they started running into problems and they eventually had to close them down.
Thanks, Dave. Anything else on this topic?
I just appreciate the discussion. I've been thinking a lot about this too, and plus having a little one myself, and as I mean, granted, I would, even if we were open, I would probably choose not to go, just out of abundance of caution. I realize not everybody feels that way. Either they don't think the whole thing is serious, or they do think it's serious, and but still don't think this is an issue. So I get it. I get the complexity of this, but I also think of the responsibility of our decision. I mean, I hear everything that's been said. I've read the emails and I've heard some of the comments, but I still think our job is to err on the side of what is best for the community, on the side of caution. So I appreciate the work and the input from everybody.
Good. Anything else? Sophie, is it appropriate for somebody, the chair or you, to respond to the citizen who sent us an email?
Sure, I'd be happy to work with Cindy if she is, if she
Sure.
wants to do that.
Yep.
Hi, Cindy.
Hi there. Sorry
I'll
for
let-
being a little late.
Well, I'll let you take over.
All right. I again don't have the agenda in front of me, so.
We're making it up today.
Oh, okay. So
I think we're now going to the reviewing of the budget material that you had sent out, Sophie.
Yeah, I if it's helpful, I thought I would throw up the slides. I've put a small slideshow together, but I've updated the I've updated them with the new numbers, taking into consideration what we talked about last week and or earlier this week. Sorry, but it's all blends together. And also updated forecasting. So if you give me just a second, I will share my screen. Belle, would you allow me to share my screen? Thank you. So what I had sent along to council was about a 17-page report that kind of tried to give a more comprehensive analysis of the budget. And we started off with a summary at the beginning that talked about the projected net assessment. This number is different than the one in your report because I have forecasted revenues. We have cut some expenses out of the budget, but the revenue projection has decreased, and I can go into more depth as to how I calculated that if council is interested. Were there any questions about the general analysis? So
no. So Sophie, so the projected income went up?
No, the projected income went down
Am I not
significantly.
I'm not
Yeah,
looking at the
we
right
went
number.
from, if we look here, Cindy, we went from a gain of about $12,000 to a loss of about $155,000. And that was almost entirely due to revenue sharing, the additional losses. Digging into the State Forecasting Committee's report, I went ahead and recalculated what I think the revenue sharing number will be. I keep hoping that they will publish new revenue sharing forecasts, but they haven't yet. I looked at that. There are two factors in play with revenue sharing. One is we were supposed to go from 3% of sales tax and income tax receipts to 3.75%, which that on its own was forecast to be almost a $500,000 increase to the town of Orono. However, revenue sharing is based on actual receipts. So when the economy drops, then we really see that very quickly in revenue sharing. I went ahead knowing that they are forecasting the fourth quarter to come in at about 50% of collections, 48.7%. I went ahead and looked at prior years, adjusted it for the increase in percentage, and then said we would collect 55% in the first quarter, 65% in the second quarter, and 75% in quarter 3 and 4, which dropped us down approximately another, $150,000. Did I answer your question, Cindy?
Yes, and I was looking at the wrong chart too.
Oh, well, that's so these numbers. Yep.
Nope, go ahead.
Mm-mm.
I had a question. I mean, I'm still in revenue. I'm not sure where this
Sure.
where the University of Maine annual payment is
Yep.
is in there.
It's on
Are
the
we-
bottom of page 2.
Right, but I don't know if it's in your revenue summary.
Oh, yep. That actually comes through as intergovernmental revenue. That's how our
Okay.
auditor reports it.
Good. Are we in danger? I mean, the University of Maine system is down millions of dollars as well. Are we in any danger of losing that 655,000 or having
So-
that decreased?
At this point, I've not been given any notice that they have, and normally whenever they are looking at that, I get a jingle from somebody, whether it's Maine Revenue Service or somebody sitting in finance and administration. My philosophy, whether it's right or wrong, has been kind of to do a little bit of wait and see, because I know so much is up in the air for them.
Right. I know that they've been making this payment for many, many years and it hasn't really changed. Has it ever changed when they were in like 2008 when there was the recession? They are pretty stable as far as keeping the municipal. Good. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, the way that's structured, Cheryl, it really doesn't feel like a voluntary payment.
Okay.
And we would never publicize it as a voluntary payment.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Thanks. Questions about revenue? So I think this, Cheryl, is where you were interested the other day, was to talk about revenue sharing. And what this graph shows you is that 2008, we kind of hit our heyday with revenue sharing at like $1.6 million. And it came down, just kept kind of coming down. And then in 2014, they totally rated it. This is when we went down to 2%. And then in 2020, we budgeted that we were going to receive 1.5 million. The forecast, which is the gray bar, which is what we have been working, we knew was coming, was at 2,004,000. And the projections that I just showed you have it at about 1.25 million, 1,248,000. So this is where you see costs go up, but revenue really, we took a hit. Excise tax is the other major revenue center that we have. And you'll see that since 2012, we've been consistently going up. When you consider that those are fairly small transactions that all take staff time, you can see why Shelley and her staff are getting busier and busier. We're registering more vehicles. I had hoped we were on track to bring in a little over 800,000 this year. I think we're probably going to be about a little bit short there, although we have some brand new vehicles coming in that will help a bit. The plan at this point is to continue to project at last year's level. There are communities out there that are assuming that nobody's going to buy new cars, that they're going to take a really big hit on excise tax. And when I look at Orono, we have so many leased vehicles, and we we just don't see as much of an impact on excise tax with the economy as other communities do. And I don't know why that is, but if you look, the drop in 2012 was because Sunrise Materials left. But otherwise, we stayed pretty consistent through what would have been a downturn in the economy. So I could be wrong, but I would prefer to be optimistic. And I'm still leaving about 30,000 out there that I think we would otherwise collect. So I'm not pushing it to the end.
Sophie, have you gotten any anticipatory tremors that the state could potentially be fiddling with the homestead exemption reimbursement to the town, or Betty reimbursements, or too soon to tell?
So we haven't heard anything, which can be really scary at times, but the homestead is expected to go from 20,000 to 25,000 this year, the exemption, and that additional 5,000 is supposed to be refunded at 100% to the town. So if you look in your revenue projections, I've increased the homestead significantly, but I've also taken a corresponding amount of value off our taxable valuation. So if they elected not to implement the homestead, then that would actually, it would have zero impact on the mill rate because we wouldn't lose the value. I think the legislature is going to have a really hard time curtailing municipal revenue in the middle of a biennium. I really do. I just, again, maybe I'm being a little Pollyanna-esque, but we fought very hard to get revenue sharing somewhat restored. And remember, we're not there yet. We still have 1.25% to go. But there's always a possibility. We can never say never with Augusta. You ready to move on? So the rest of our revenue streams are really lots of smaller pots of money, and that helps us maintain some sense of stability. The one that we are a little bit concerned about moving forward is ambulance EMS billing. We were actually on track to meet our EMS goals. Then when COVID-19 hit, people decided they didn't want to go to the hospital, and our runs have declined precipitously. I don't know if it's going to stay that way. We're starting to see some rebound with EMS this month. At this point, I have left that alone in the budget. So I've left it at our historical estimate. So if council wants to be more conservative, that's a place that we should probably look to pull that down from 394,000. Okay. So revenues are new money in, so a new dollar that comes to the town. However, we like to balance the gap between revenues and expenses by using funds that we already hold. And I think the meat of this report was to try to lay out for council some information about the funds that we hold. Think of it as savings accounts. And the big issue with fund balance is that we use that money to be able to operate all year long. So we don't have to go and take loans out while we wait for people to pay their bills. So the lower fund balance gets, the more risk we have with running into cash flow issues. We have 4 categories of fund balance. The first is non-spendable, and in 2016 and 17, that included accounts receivable and prepaid expense. We don't include those as non-spendable fund balance anymore. Instead, what you're seeing there is the value of our bulk gas and diesel at year end. So that's why it's not spendable, because it's not cash, but we have to book the asset. The restricted funds, those are tax increment financing dollars. Those are funds that we are required to collect and segregate and only use for those purposes that the state of Maine has approved for us to use them. Assigned funds are funds that council has control over. You assign a purpose for them. So if it's for future spending, if it is for an emergency fund, the rec scholarship would be in that fund. It's money that we've put aside that we've said we want to use it for a specific purpose. The lion's share of that reserve is the cash that we brought in through the sale of 3 Godfrey Drive that was assigned because it is allocated, it's assigned to pay off the general obligation debt bond that was associated with the construction of that building. We have the final balloon payment this year of a little over $1 million, which is why you're seeing part of the lion's share of that drop. The rest of that drop comes in using the funds, $100,000 towards equipment purchases and some of our other reserve funds that we have suggested we would use in the budget. Unassigned fund balance is just that. It is cash on hand or fund balance on hand that has no particular assignment. Having said that it has no assignment, we're going to talk in a few minutes about some restrictions that council has placed by virtue of its bond obligations. But we can talk about that when we get to that slide, if that works. People have questions about this?
The numbers in the 2020 projected and the 2021 estimated unassigned fund are different than what we have. Is that based on what we have done already, the work that we've done already?
No, I think the biggest piece, I think the unassigned is I've made an assumption that we're going to put $150,000 back in based upon where revenue is coming in right now. That could change again, but that I wanted to be fair and say I don't think we're going to take out, and I think we might put a little bit back into fund balance at the end of the year. $150,000 sounds like a lot of money, except that we're working on a $11, $12 million budget. So that's kind of cutting it close. And so that would impact, making that change this year, Cheryl, impacts moving forward. And the TIF, if the TIF is changed, that has to do with the, I don't think I changed the TIF yet.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Are we ready to move on again, or? I've only got 4 faces, so, all right. So this is just a different way to show fund balance because it's easy to look at numbers, and those are really, really big numbers. When you put them in graphs, they look a lot smaller. And this is where you can see we've been using a lot of assigned fund balance, and getting down close to $3 million is really a little bit uncomfortable for me. So I don't know if you can see the whole thing. This looks huge on my screen. So we have a policy, we have a policy in place that says that we will keep between 11 and 15% of unassigned fund balance, and 11 to 15% of our last adopted expense budget will be kept in unassigned fund balance. Last year we went, it was either last year or the year before, we went through and said we would also include 25% of unassigned fund balance. So we're working from the last audited financial statement and the last approved budget. Is that the way that policy works? Looking at that, this is designed to show you. So first thing I did is I took the TIF expenditures out because they come from the assigned fund balance. And what it shows is that at 11%, we would have about $1.2 million of usable unassigned fund balance. And at 15%, we'd have about $351,000 of unassigned fund balance. Right now, the budget assumes using 400,000.
Sophie, could we go back just for a second and
Sure.
bring me up to date at least on what was our thinking in including 25% of the assigned fund balance in our projection last year or whenever we did it?
So we changed that policy, and I think the thinking of it was that we had a considerable amount of assigned fund balance that could, if we had an emergency, council could reassign without, or unassign without creating a catastrophe.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And that would be like equipment reserve and
Yeah, so
So
it's the
maintenance.
equipment reserve, it's landfill closure, unemployment reserve, skate park, public works, and library maintenance reserve, solid waste reserve. I mean, I think all of these reserves are incredibly important, but if we had a major issue that caused us to need cash, those are things that you wouldn't want to, but you could reasonably reassign. So, are we good?
Makes sense
Usually
to
I
me.
get lots of questions about this page.
You've taught us well.
So when we look at expenses, based on the work we've done thus far, we've dropped our expenses quite a bit, almost in half of what we, little over half, sorry, of what we started the budget with. The one that is in here that was a management suggestion that you guys haven't talked about is this week we were able to get up on the pool roof, and given the fact that it's not going to be, we're not going to have people around, we think we could use our own labor and repair pieces of it that absolutely need some immediate attention, and then hold that project for a year. So that fits into your pause suggestion, and that would be $15,000, which is why capital budget is down a little bit more than it had been. Questions about this? So when we look at the tax rate, we're up more than we than I thought we would be when we published the budget, and that is entirely because I've reforecasted the revenues down. And when you look at that number, I know counselors have talked about trying to get the town to zero. There's actually what that would require because of the loss of revenue. It would require about $310,000 right now. So based on those mill rates, I wanted to show you guys what the impact to a taxpayer would be. And I looked at it.
Can we go back real quick? So the total tax rate on what you sent us was up 2.87 and now it's down 2.35.
No, it's up.
But it's down from the
We
what
had
you put in our,
That was a question that I had. We had two different tax rates. One said 2.17 and one said 2.87, I think. I flagged that too. But it
So-
might have been a typo.
So we've got, yeah, so the projected mill rate when I published this was, let me just get there, 28.63.
yeah.
And that was, so yeah, I had a typo. Let me just see. I don't think it's here.
I think it should be 2.17.
Yeah, I think oh, you're absolutely right. I'm sorry. It's a typo in the chart in your report.
Okay.
Okay.
So everything actually went up even though we're cutting things
Yeah, and it's
because of the
because
revenue.
it's because of the revenue. And, you know, I talk a lot about the revenue, Cindy, because I think ultimately council needs to decide how conservative it wants to be. If we had a healthier fund balance, then I would be advocating that you be a lot less conservative. But I'm a little bit nervous when our fund balance is probably going to be close to 3 million.
Yeah, and we've been talking about fund balance for many years and worrying about where's the tipping point. So
Yeah.
And the other thing, Sophie, there are still several expenditure items that we have not made a final decision on that are still in the budget. Is that correct?
Yes, there are.
Position, the Public Works position,
Yep.
and the project on North Main Avenue.
Yep, absolutely, Tom. The only thing I have taken are the things I've told you about,
Yep.
plus from our conversation yesterday, this does include the pool closure. So we like to talk about an average home in Orono, which Mike Noble says 175,000 still would be about an average home. If somebody has a homestead exemption, they're only paying, last year they paid taxes on a value of 155,000. This year they would be paying taxes on a value of 150,000. So you'll see it's a $55 increase for the town, $4.50 increase for the county, and $159.40 for the school. Take that same house and put somebody in it that does not qualify for the homestead. So it's a rental property. It's somebody who just came to town. It's somebody who has ignored our observer articles and has never filed for a homestead exemption. You know, it could, and that person, instead of a $218.75 increase, they're going to see an increase of almost $410. So just want to keep that in mind. It's awful easy for us to key in on the fact that people will see, with homesteads, will see $5,000 extra dollars taken off their value this year. But that is for a business that doesn't qualify for a homestead, for rental properties. You look at a housing complex that has $25 million of value, a $2 and 10, even if we get to zero, we'd be close to $2, 28.10. So over $2 increase in the mill rate is going to impact people. So this is just me.
Sophie,
Oh,
can
go ahead.
you just explain real quick why the school cost has gone down on both of these from what you handed out?
Yes, I got in touch with a counselor, astutely picked up a different number in Brian McGill's email to council. And so I reached out to the school. They cut almost $9,000 out of the budget in their last budget meeting. So these numbers reflect the most up-to-date school budget number.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Ready? So this is my last, just want to remind people that when you look just at the percent change in our budget, and this is our net operating assessment, we have had little tiny increases. And then if you remember, in 2017 and 2018, we were dealing with trying to restore where we cut a little bit too deep, and we ended up bringing back some public safety positions. We were responding to some real problems with policing at the Grove and those items. Then we came back down to a pretty small increase. And remember last year, 330,000, our assessment was actually down 330,000 from the previous year. And that's because when the revenue sharing came in, we wanted to pass along a tax relief. So I just wanted to make sure some of the comments I've received have talked about our ever growing burden that we want more and more every year from taxes, and just remind people that we passed along a pretty significant tax relief last year. So that's what I've got for budget overview.
So I just kind of wanted to at least jump in and say that, you know, because we are talking about the expenditures we may or may not have this year, or the positions we may or may not fill. I guess where I'm at, if this is helpful for staff, for you, Sophie, is that I want to see what it looks like to try to get to that zero change position. But I also would feel at least not happy about, but comfortable with returning to our our previous year, the 2019 rate, which was 27, I think.
2645.
2645, okay. So like last year,
you mean our previous?
Yes, before we
gotcha, 27.
Right. So last year's budget, we were able to finally get at least some increase in the revenue sharing. We passed that along to property tax relief, and I'm very happy that we were able to do that. If we're not able to sort of get to that zero change position, I would at least feel somewhat comfortable with returning to pre-revenue sharing increase tax rate in the previous year. But I still I want to see what it looks like to try to get as close to the zero change as possible.
So when you say zero change, Megan, are you talking in the bottom line or in the municipal portion?
In the mill rate, yeah.
In the bottom line of the mill rate?
Yeah.
Boy, I think that's a stretch.
Well, I think that people are expecting us to at least talk about it and to see what it looks like.
When you look at the school's increase, I don't see how we could possibly get to a no mill increase. I'm interested in looking at how we can get to a no mill municipal increase, but we have no control over the school, and nor should we. And it's impossible to think that we could get to a no mill increase, including the school, I think.
I agree with you, Tom, but what I am concerned about, in just sort of the feedback that we've been receiving about this budget, is that well-intentioned decisions were made in an election last year about the school budget and the bond, and I'm not passing judgment on that at all, but that is what the town wanted. Now it's just bad luck that that's happening at the same time that this is happening. So unfortunately, though, I feel like our budget is receiving the majority of the attention and the pressure about tax increases, and I think that it could be at least useful. I don't propose that we spend a lot of time on it, but I think it would be useful based on some of the feedback that we're receiving and that I'm receiving in the community, if people could see what it would really look like for us to make up for the increase in the school portion of the overall budget.
Boy.
I really have an issue with trying to make up for their $1.56 difference in our budget. We're pretty tight as it is. But I'd like to see us get to where we can be at comfortable as low as possible on the municipal side, but I just don't see we can make up the school. We've done that, and that's
I'm not suggesting that we try to do that, but I don't think people, I think that the charts that Sophie puts out every year that break it down by county and school and town are extremely helpful in a normal year. I don't feel like it's hitting home based on some of the feedback that I'm hearing and that we're receiving about changes we should be making to the budget. I agree with you. I don't think it's possible to do that, nor do I think we should make up for that. But I think that it could be helpful for people to at least see a big picture overview of what it would mean for us to have to do that, so that they, as an intellectual exercise for people to understand that it's not a question of don't buy a truck this year, or, there've been a lot of comments people have been making, cut administration, all of these kinds of things. It's not that simple. And I think that maybe as just an intellectual exercise, it would be nice for people to see what it would actually mean for us to have to do that.
I think, Megan, when people voted for that, for the school restoration, the projects that they're doing in the bond, I think they expected, because when I went to those meetings, there was an expectation that the mill rate would go up a little bit. And then we got hit with the COVID. So I think our community understands that the mill rate was going to go up if that was voted in. That's how it was presented.
Yeah, and actually, if you read carefully the information that Brian McGill sent out recently, the mill rate for the school is going up less than they anticipated it would with the information they gave out about the construction project.
Yes, I saw that too in Brian's note, and our town voted overwhelmingly to support upgrading the schools. There's not been a new building since 1980, and they're not ADA compliant. We had a child who went to middle school and couldn't roll into the building because she was in a wheelchair, and that was years ago, a decade ago. The school board was like, well, one day she'll be out of middle school, and now we have a school board that's really been supportive of our students with disabilities, our students who are LGBTQ. They're progressive, they're thoughtful. They came up with a way that we could bring our facilities to a higher level, and we would they'll reduce their budget in the future, because that money that they've been spending to rent performing arts facilities, the university, they don't need to do. I mean, I think that the town voted for that, and I think the town staff has done a fabulous job giving us this information. It's hard for people to see that, especially in the time of COVID, that costs are going to go up for the mill rate, but that was expected. So
respectfully, Cheryl and Lori, I'm not saying this isn't an argument about whether that school bond was the right call or whether the community wanted it. I'm not under any obligation to say what I do in a voting booth, but I voted for the bond and I believe in its necessity. We don't need to litigate that. That's not my point. My point is, right now, there are a lot of people who are focusing the attention on the mill rate on council. And this is true every year. I think it's been getting a little bit better. But what I'm saying is that even though people expected the mill rate to increase because of the bond, and people overwhelmingly voted for the bond, there are a lot of people in this community right now who are focusing their attention on this budget and what that number is at the end of the day. And I think that they think that, or under the impression that we have more control over it than we do, even with the breakdown that normally seems to help. And all I'm suggesting is that for people to be able to just see, even if it's a big picture overview, as part of that presentation, what it would look like to try to make the overall mill rate closer to what people may have been expecting. I think it would be useful for all those people who are very angry right now and think that we have control over that mill rate more than we do.
So Megan, my concern is if we did what you're suggesting, it would have to be predominantly with personnel. We would have to identify 2 policemen and 3 firemen and 4 public works employees or whatever it might be. And you know, by identifying personnel, then you could get the amount of money that would be necessary to get you to 0. But I don't think even in doing that, the public would understand the significant difference in service that the community would receive. I think they'd say, well, I think the people who are now concerned might very well say, well, okay, we can do without 2 policemen and we can do without 2 firemen. I'm not sure it would get us to a point where the people who are unhappy with the mill rate, and I'm unhappy with the mill rate, are going to feel better about it. But that's just my opinion.
I mean, I see the logic in that, Tom, and that's why I keep stressing that as far back as you can pull the camera, the better. But even if it's something to say like we would have to reduce our town staff by X percentage, or I don't know. I feel like this is a very, I mean, it's not a feeling. This is a very different year than most years. Yeah. And I think that some of the conversations around this particular budget and this particular mill rate are a little bit more aggressive than previous years that I've experienced. And I just am trying to figure out a way to help the community understand what's actually happening. And it might take a little bit more work than what we normally do, is all I'm suggesting.
I think no matter what we do, and I certainly, Megan, I completely understand your point. I think it could be a valuable exercise. Tom, I absolutely understand your point, that it's like we could be drawing attention to situations that we don't want to necessarily say, oh, see, they know how to sharpen an axe, because that's not it at all, you know, and I don't think that's beneficial. I think we have a much clearer perspective in what the overall, you know, staff is doing here. And I certainly, you know, support, you know, the school expansion. I think that's important, but it's all a perfect storm. And at the same time, while we're feeling this perfect storm, I think where it is becoming heated, Megan, that you're experiencing, and I think we all are when we talk to people in the public, is because they're feeling the pinch too. I mean, this pinch is hitting everybody. And when everyone starts feeling the pinch, they all start thinking somebody, whoever can, has to fix this somehow. And man, we're just in an uncomfortable time. And I think illustrating what we could possibly do and what that could mean, sure, we could get rid of different things, but do we want to do that? No, we don't. We want a library. You know, we want to have a pool, but you know, that's something that we're looking at probably for very, you know, realistic reasons, you know, isn't going to happen this year. All right. And I'm not trying to convince anybody, I'm not lecturing, but I'm just acknowledging what a difficult situation we're in. And if there's a time for people to show compassion with what we're trying to do, even though we understand the pinch people are feeling, we're doing our best. We can do whatever we can to illustrate this. At the same time, I don't want to spend a bunch of staff time on creating something that, you know, that could be beneficial, you know, but, you know, so I don't know. I guess I'm just saying, wow, I feel everybody's pain here, and let's just stick together and we'll get through this thing. All right.
So I try really hard to leave home at home and work here, but my beloved husband has been coming home telling me stories about work, and he's got colleagues that are really feeling the pinch. They have family members that have gotten laid off, and they they're pushing about the mill rates in their communities. And it is very interesting to him that most people don't understand that the town council does not control the school budget. And so I think there is a thought out there, number one, that the town council controls more than it does. And number two, a lot of the services that we provide, if we're doing it well, kind of go unnoticed, and they're very networked and interlinked, and it's really hard to describe that to people. You know, when people say there's just so much management or so much administration, I don't have very many pure administrative people. We have a lot of doers, and we have a lot of reporting and a lot of things that have to happen. I'm willing to try to tell a story as long as it's, you know, as long as that's what council wants. I would definitely want to test it out on council first, I guess I would say.
I was, you know, this is, you know, not like a huge history of budgets, but this is my second one. And the one thing that that I've noticed and I'm really concerned about, and it almost sounds kind of cheesy, but it's like having a wine taste on a beer budget. It's very clear when you look at individuals and you kind of have those conversations about what we're situation and what's going on. And if somebody says, this is what I like, they will defend what they like. And there may be something that somebody else over here totally is like, no, I like this. So, but, and that's going to happen. But here's what my real big concern with these things is that just in the last 2 years, everything always seems to come to cut the municipal people, cut the things. And I can guarantee you, if something slips within our municipal offices, it's not going to be pretty. I mean, we don't have to look that far back. Let's just look at, you know, the code enforcement thing. It was very clear that most towns have at least 3 people, and we've got one. And then people say, like, cut it, it's heavy. But if there's something that they advocate for, there's gonna be lots of justifications for why we should keep that. Oh, no, that's fine, you know, that's okay. And I just wanna put out there, as we go through this, I'm just really concerned about cutting positions. I'm really concerned about the level that will put for our town. And I'm gonna guarantee you, there will be a lot of squawking that's gonna go on should we reduce services. And I actually, when we were first looking at this budget, I was really not wanting to cut a couple of the positions that were supposed to come online. So, but I wanna put that out there.
So I had one comment, which we heard from economic development, and I've been impressed with the, you know, the outreach that Dave is doing to businesses, and the idea to come up with not the idea, but the implementing the loan program. But when you talk about the things that aren't coming in, that we're not having the revenue sharing may not come in, and we don't have as many businesses here, so you could see the impact of Sunrise leaving in, you know, from one year to the next. One thing that we do get regular income from, the people who are complaining when the mill rate goes up, they're paying property taxes. So that's a big percent of what our income is. So, and we said in our comprehensive plan, and I think it was every single town councilor said when we had a training among us, that housing was a really important issue. Providing more housing for middle and low income people in our town was something that everyone agreed with. And so perhaps one thing we should be looking at is to put in the line item of the goals of economic development to be working to bring developers all over the state. There's a problem with developers not being interested in building low and middle income housing. There's a very small margin on it to do it as a business. But if we were to court people to come to our town to build more housing, we would then have more citizens, and therefore we would have more income from property taxes. And we already have the infrastructure. If those places are built in town, they'd be on existing infrastructure, so it wouldn't add infrastructure costs. It would add more taxpayers to paying into our revenue. So
That's a great thing, but right now it's like we're at the front door of a budget that's not gonna matter right now anyway. But
well, a budget is a plan for the future. What do we plan for the future? We plan to protect our citizens, therefore we have public safety people. We plan to have, we plan to have code enforcement, therefore we have code enforcement people. So I'm just saying that I'm not contesting Dave's budget at all, but in the bulleted items, and I'm sorry I didn't mention it the other day, we went over it, it didn't say something about addressing this goal of increasing the amount of housing, and I assume that it's in that department that would be handling if we had people who were going to come in here and say, oh, I want to build houses here. But maybe that we, as counselors, say, if our budget is a sign of what we want our future to be, and we want our future to be that our staff courts people to come and build here, and it's not an easy thing. Dave does a lot of things that aren't easy. This is another not easy thing. If it were easy, people would be coming in here building all the time. So I'm not saying that it would give us money right away, but if we are looking towards what we want the future to be, we want more revenue. We're not going to have some big company come in and suddenly increase our tax base. That just hasn't happened. And we're already having the challenge of so many of our small businesses because of COVID they're not doing well. So, but people do want to live in Orono, and because of COVID, people all over the country are looking at how nice it would be if you didn't live chock-a-block, cheek by jowl onto your neighbors. So I think that rural areas like ours that are wonderful places to be will be places that people who might want to move to, but there's no place to move to here because we don't have extra housing.
Good point.
Should we talk about the things we can control right now?
Yes.
Sophia, you have some slides for us to see. Sophie, you're muted.
There we go. So, can people, I can't see anybody now. Let me just pull this up. There we go. So, we wanted to talk about some anticipated vacancies, and I need people just to bear with us because it's not as simple as this position is vacant, and if we don't, they can just go away. And the first one we talk about is a good example of that. So we have a public works equipment operator, public works worker 2. So it's a full-time skilled position that we have received or are anticipating receiving a resignation. Unfortunately, an individual who's been with us for 20 years is unable to continue to work. So we, when we look at that, we look at public works staffing, and we understand that we staff public works to winter maintenance. That's the level we decide what our winter maintenance level is going to be. We staff to that, and then in the summer we fill in the scope of the services that we provide in the summer is based on that level of staffing. Am I making sense to folks? Okay. So one option that we have, we really can't go without a public works equipment operator. To just simply drop that position out would severely impact the level of service. And Rob can talk a little bit about that in just a minute. Instead, the option that we are suggesting is that you look at potentially filling that position internally. And the way that we would look at doing that is to take the current shared laborer, which is why Joe is on the call with us, because the laborer is allocated 50% to WPCF and 50% to Public Works, and reassign him to Public Works as a laborer, then let Rob work with the laborers and hopefully have one of them qualify for and be able to fill an equipment operator slot in the winter. So that's kind of the option. What I'd like both Rob and Joe to talk about is what that would mean, what that would look like on the face of the earth. Either one, you guys can flip the coin for who starts.
I don't mind, Joe. So for Public Works, the position is shared in the wintertime. The person who holds that position is primarily assigned to sidewalk maintenance. So they're not assigned a plow route. So we have 5 plow routes, which tie up 10 people. So we have 2 opposing shifts that work together. This shared position is not assigned to any of those 10 slots, which means that independently of where the roads and parking lots and all the other things that we take care of in the wintertime, this person can begin the sidewalks while all that other stuff is being finished. So what it would mean to not have that person would mean that either, and of course, every storm's a little bit different. Timing is always different. And timing is always the thing that, so that, when somebody looks out their window at 7 o'clock to see what the conditions are like, it kind of depends on when the snow stopped. But usually, depending on, of course, the severity of the storm, but usually it takes an hour or 2 for us to finish cleaning up once a storm is over. So that happens in the overnight period, let's say 2 a.m. That means that somewhere around 4 a.m. we can start transitioning to parking lots and clearing those out. That takes another couple hours. So if it stops at 2, sometime around 6 or 7 o'clock, we can start sidewalks. If we have the shared position available, that person can start 2 to even 4 hours earlier, depending on when the storm ends, to get the sidewalk started, get the primary routes. So Main Street across the bridge, make the connection back across the bridge to the school area, Main Street, and then work their way out College Avenue. So in a 2 to 4 hour period, before 7 o'clock, when we get back to full staffing levels, we can make some pretty good headway on sidewalks, and therefore try and beat that. 7 o'clock is sort of the witching hour for the town. That's when people start waking up. The expectation is that if school's going to be open that day, that students can walk to school on the sidewalks. So we work very hard to have the majority of our work that requires using up the street and getting things ready to use ready by 7. So having the flexibility of being able to assign that person, say at 4 a.m. to work on the sidewalks for 3 hours while the rest of the crew finish the parking lots and the streets, ultimately by 7 adds a pretty big amount to the workload we can achieve by that time.
So Rob, is this position only in the winter?
So this is so I have him in, this person works with Public Works from October to April. And then in the summertime, he goes and works with the WPCF crew, with Joe filling another essential role. I think, Joe, you can probably talk a little bit about that one.
Oh, you gotta unmute, Joe.
Okay, perfect. So this shared position works closely with my collection system lead. Right now, they're cleaning sewers in the town of Orono. We try to clean 2/3 of the accessible sewers every year. We're pushed to do that by our insurance company as well as the state of Maine DEP. So that's how we stay ahead of that. If we lose the position, I'll just have to fill it with one of my other guys. So, for instance, I had to take a load to Juniper Ridge yesterday because they were all busy cleaning a tank. And that was even with a shared position. So sometimes we need a lot of help around here. And that's why we went for that shared position to begin with. They'll also clean, they're maintaining our right-of-ways. which we're really doing a much better job than we ever did. So that's my guy.
So one of the things, oh, go ahead, Tom, sorry.
If you didn't have this person and you had to take somebody else from the plant to work on cleaning sewer lines, what's that impact? What doesn't get done at the plant that now does get done?
Mostly it ends up in the maintenance. Tom doesn't, we don't have the time to do our maintenance that we need to do.
Like taking care of pumps and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to get to it because we're not going to let it go, but we just get stuff done together.
So if I was going to summarize the way I see it, Tom, this shared position came about because it was really filling two very important needs. However, right now, if we had to find savings, this would not be a bad temporary change, because one of the things you're going to hear from me is that on Joe's side, Joe really kind of needs some savings too. We've seen a significant drop in consumption. So this might be a good place to take a pause. Nothing is ideal, but the issue with taking the pause is y'all have to be well aware the place you're going to hear about it. You're not going to hear about it from Joe. You're not really going to even hear about it from Rob. You're going to hear about it when the snow stops at 5 o'clock and we don't have anybody even on a sidewalk until 8 or 9. And we've had comments like Public Works just needs to be reminded that sidewalks are important, and that's not the case. We know sidewalks are important, but we know we have a legal responsibility to clear the roads first. And I think it's one of those things that sometimes it's easy when it's beautiful outside and 80 degrees for us to decide that we can take a drop in sidewalk response. But in the wintertime, when the emails come, I have counselors say, isn't there something that we can do to make this a little better? And the fact is, if we drop this position, the answer is going to be no. I mean, truly 100% no. And people would need to just be aware of that.
Sophie, is there someone internally who is ready to take on this position already?
No. Rob, can you talk for just a little bit about what it will take?
Yeah, so the biggest difference between our Public Works employee class 1s and 2s would be that the class 2s are required to have a commercial driver's license. So a CDL is required to operate the heavy equipment. So like I said, they would be assigned a plow route and use one of the heavy duty plow trucks. So there's a significant amount of training associated with taking on that role. The other part that I'm a little concerned about is being able to actually go through the process. I think I have a couple of people on staff that have the ability to achieve that. I'm just wondering if they're going to even be able to go through the state process of achieving a CDL license with a permit test and then a driving test. Right now, I know that at least currently the DMV isn't even issuing dates for tests, so we could run into a little bit of trouble there.
We got good news. DMV is opening back up as of June 1.
So Sophie, this goes back to what I just said previously is that, I mean, obviously you've been dealing with this through the winter time when people question the services that are on the sidewalk and somebody's attendance to it. And that's why what I alluded to last about cutting things, and this is what it ends up, and we were already doing them before that. But is there any way to assess what, say you don't fill that, obviously the job has to get done. What's the impact on overtime for that for that area, is it really worth it for public works for snow removal? What is it? Is there a big impact on those storms? We'll say if we don't fill that position.
Is it more about a delay, Rob?
Yeah, I don't think that you would necessarily see a significant increase associated with overtime costs. Of course, if it snows every weekend, that might change. But the primary issue will be that 2 to 4 hour delay, or even more if it's a big storm, between the time that we have the existing staff finishing up parking lots for the schools and the municipal parking lots, and then being able to transition then to sidewalks. I won't be able to overlap that effort, which is really how we can sort of, I like to say we pull a rabbit out of our hat sometimes. In between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m., we get a lot of work done because we're able to, as the storm begins to slow down and people wake up and see that the sun's come out and the snow is over and all the roads are clear, it's because there was a huge effort put in early in the morning to get those facilities ready. And I just, without this person, without getting that machine out there as soon as the last plow out is plowed back, I just don't think that's going to be a noticeable difference in service level.
Thank you. I just wanted people to understand that should this be a thing that we choose to do, that there is some form of impact, as we've seen before, to be very understanding of what your crew has to go through.
And Rob, my question too, I have two questions actually. One is, what is the cost to train this said person? That's one. But the second one is, do you have restrictions or regulations on the amount of hours that your guys can be out on the road as well? Like without sleep?
Yeah, so our response, and we'll talk a lot more about this probably next week, I would guess, when I bring my full budget to council. But our response is 2 shifts essentially that work opposite each other of 5 routes, like I said earlier. And each shift is limited to a 16-hour period with an 8-hour break in between. And so essentially, if you had an extended event, one group is going to work from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. and another group may work from 11 p.m. all the way around to 3 p.m. the next day. And then we can kind of just continue. So generally there's an overlap from 7 to 3 during the day. So we can usually if it's during an event, get caught up during that point. But doesn't allow us, that's when the lion's share of the work on sidewalks would happen, when we had a full staffing level during that 7 to 3 period. But that doesn't help us out when, you want to have the sidewalks done for 8 o'clock, when really we start to see a pretty big uptick in pedestrian traffic.
And training? What would it take to train?
The training we can do internally. That's something that we've got a lot of people here experienced enough to pass their knowledge on to other people. The employee is responsible for paying for the licensure fees, because ultimately that license goes with them no matter where they go. It's not tied to the town of Orono in any way. So there aren't a lot of costs associated with the training process, except for, of course, the time that we put into it. But we don't do that on overtime. We would just work that into our schedule over the summer to make sure that they were ready to roll for the winter.
And chances are, whether we fill the position or not, you're going to end up training somebody, because you're probably unlikely to hire someone that already has the license. Is that correct?
I think Rob is frozen.
Okay.
And I'm going to say our experience would say you are absolutely correct, Tom, that And I think in many ways, we would want to try to bring an existing employee up to an equipment operator anyway.
That makes sense.
So on this particular position, I understand that it's going to put us in a service level issue. I also understand that our public works director doesn't like things not to happen, so I'm afraid that he will jump into the sidewalk machine, but I hope not. But I'm also a little optimistic that perhaps we might see some federal funds somewhere down the line. We might see, the state trickle down a little bit more money. And so I feel comfortable taking this position out of the budget, hoping that if we saw some sort of, stimulus relief, that we could put it back in and perhaps get it back in before winter. And I may be starry-eyed, but that's my position.
I hope that you're right, Cindy. I know I've said this before, but my experience as just a resident years ago was always like, if the sidewalk was plowed when I wanted to go somewhere, I thought, wow, the town does a great job. And if it wasn't, I would think, boy, what's the town doing? Not plowing the sidewalks fast enough. I mean, people don't spend a lot of time thinking about how it all works. And I know that last winter, we did get a lot of complaints, but it was also very straightforward for me to explain to people, yes, but we had to make these changes for safety reasons. And this is how we do it if we can't add more personnel because we don't have the money for it. This is the choice we had to make, a slight reduction in service to promote safety when we're lacking in funds. Now we find ourselves, the vice is tightened. And I understand we're going to catch a lot of heat in the winter if Cindy's starry-eyed dreams don't come true. But, it's just, I think that it's a reasonable move to make in this particular year. And again, I've said this before, obviously the current economic conditions are almost accelerating the situation, but residents need to feel how tight this budget is and how little room we have to work with it, because it's not just about what we come up with, the numbers we come up with every year. I mean, there are so many other factors in play that are out of our control at the state level and above. So if people start feeling those pinches and we have to explain to them, we just don't have the money for it, then when they see the service level reductions, I think that's when people will really start to take those issues seriously.
And I also remember last year that even though the sidewalks were plowed, there was ice, and no matter how much you plow them, you can't get the ice off all the time. So
Yeah.
No, I agree. I mean, at the same point, everyone wants the mill rate down now, and then in the winter, they're going to want the sidewalks plowed at 3 a.m. And that's our job, is to make the best decision, and listen to the consequences.
So does that mean that we're reaching a bit of a consensus here, or are you just chatting?
I support keeping the position, the positions. I support getting to the sidewalks, and so I just weighed in.
Okay. I support eliminating or anticipating this vacancy for a while. So I don't know if anybody else wants to take a formal vote at this point, or just if this is enough for you to go by, Sophie.
Sophie, what's the difference between, numbers wise, putting a pause on this position or going to our option, which is to fill internally and reclassify, which is?
So the problem with trying to put a pause on this particular position is that when we get to the winter time, and Rob can jump in, but when we get to the winter time, you're essentially taking a secondary position and keeping it filled for the sidewalks and not having enough people to plow 5 plow routes. We would have to go down to 4 plow routes, which would then everybody's going to see a significantly noticeable difference. When we talked about options for downsizing the winter service level, it always assumed that the shared position would be a first step, and then an equipment operator would be a second step. Rob, can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think when you look at service level impacts, leaving the operator's position open would force us to change our plow routes. And so you're going to begin to see lower level of service on our overall response, as opposed to filling the operator's position, leaving the shared position open, really impacts that one small piece. We couldn't, without the 5 opposing routes, we can't continue the level of service on the streets and parking lots at the same level that we are now. So that's kind of the first step. If you're looking at lowering the level of service for winter maintenance, it's the shared position that would need to go first, lower that level of service, and then we need to continue to talk about lowering level of service from there. Then that's when you'd start talking about reducing the routing from 5 to 4. And we talked about that a little bit as a potential cost reduction, but not a recommendation.
So we'd still see a cost reduction of 39,000 in the general fund. We'd still see a cost reduction with the option to fill internally, correct?
Yes.
I think I'm going to have to go with that one. I think the option is we still have a cost reduction, and we still have a public works equipment operator.
I support the internal position.
Can I just clarify that what we're talking about is still in the pause? We're keeping a position vacant either until we get to the next budget to talk about it, or in the event that additional funding comes in, correct?
Correct.
Correct.
Yes.
All right. So based on what I'm hearing, we could move forward as if this position was going to remain vacant and adjust our current budget documents to reflect that. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yep.
On to the next one. Our Parks and Recreation Coordinator. We had talked earlier, I think it was actually last year during the budget, about a need to make Parks and Recreation a little bit more, to staff it with a little bit more of a doer, and to be able to start to kind of fill it out and make our department a little bit more robust. That in trying to respond to years of cuts in revenue sharing, the answer had been in many ways to just shave Parks and Rec down to just a framework. We have a great framework right now. I think we've got the good bones. We've got a good relationship with the University of Maine, and to provide some youth sports and also some other things for us. The other piece of this is Mr. Mylan in Economic Development has given me his professional plan, and we need to do some succession planning. And the thought was that we would eventually likely move Mitch into our current Parks and Rec director, kind of in to fill in where Dave is. But we also identified a need for some on-the-job training and experience. So as those conversations began, it also became very apparent that our Parks and Rec program does an awful lot of economic development. Mitch does a lot of community event planning and a lot of the trails and marketing. And so we made the argument, and it passed the straight face test, to move last year 10 hours of our Parks and Rec director's time into the economic development budget, and have him fill a role there as the deputy of community development, which means in many ways doing the things that were already important for Parks and Rec, but also supporting and learning from Dave. And I think we lost Dave. So part of this plan had been to backfill hours in Parks and Rec with the coordinator. And I came to you before COVID-19 with a request to try to fill it in May, and ended up holding that because of COVID-19. We have a top candidate identified, but I am waiting to get through the budget, because the last thing I want to do is hire somebody to then have to lay them off, because it's not a position that we are going to move forward with. So I wanted to take a few minutes today to talk about how this position kind of impacts both Parks and Recreation and economic development. The way it's currently budgeted, 100% of this position is budgeted in Parks and Recreation, but only 25%, we essentially go down to a 25% Parks and Rec director, 75% community development director, and paying for 75% of his time through the tax increment financing district, because he would be doing community event planning, marketing, and business support. So I wanted to take just a couple of minutes. So it's not as easy as saying this position will cost us X number of dollars, and to pull that position out is all savings. The only way that happens is if we leave 10 hours of Mitch's time in Parks and Recreation, which we can, I have both of them set up to tell you what the transition would be. So if we could start with Mitch telling us what it would mean to Parks and Rec, and then Dave, if you could follow up with what it would mean for economic development.
So I guess I'd start by saying that I understand that all of this is extremely difficult to go through, and the challenges that we face are unknown, and so I appreciate everyone listening and trying to figure out what the best plan forward is. As far as the new position for us, and looking at where we're going and what we're looking to do, especially now with the environment that we're in, this position certainly would help us do a ton of things when we start to look at how do we revamp what we're doing to fit the guidelines of the moment, and still be able to provide programming, along with, especially in the summer months here, trying to figure out ways in which we might be able to fill in some gaps for programming at no or low cost to folks, because some of these other amenities aren't available, and looking at, are there ways to do that? And having the ability to have somebody to help with doing that, I think would make those things possible. I think the challenge, and Sophie kind of alluded to it, is the challenge is that we are, Parks and Rec has been so close to the bone, if you will, is that everything is so highly planned because of the lack of human resource to be in multiple places at one time, that, you know, the challenges that we have faced right now is that, you know, as we go through this, everything's piling up on one another, and we're trying to figure out how to do things that we've done a certain way for a long time completely different. which takes a ton of time. So by not adding this position, it is going to be very difficult if we didn't add this position and I stayed only 10 hours, I don't know how we would do much of anything in Parks and Recreation. If the position was not, we didn't add the position and I was in the seat as the director as I currently am, the challenges that we would have are pretty big because we just have zero flexibility and timing to try to deal with the challenges that we have in front of us. I think that those things are really going to cause us to have to revamp what our services look like and the level of service that we're able to provide in Parks and Rec, and much different than it's been currently. And I'm trying to stay optimistic in the sense that there are things that we can certainly focus on, but in this unknown world, it's very difficult to try to figure out how we would move and be able to keep the same service level that we have now. So I think by not adding this position, you are going to see a service level decrease, and to be fair, trying to figure out how to work through that and what services we can provide and what we couldn't provide based on our resource level without this position, if that makes sense.
My turn.
Dave, can I ask Mitch
Sure.
a question just quick? Do you know how other places are like Bangor, Brewer, how are they kind of working their way through this coronavirus, can't get the kids together kind of situation? Have you had a chance to talk to them yet?
Yeah, I have been on pretty much once a week statewide with Parks and Rec departments and talking to Brewer, Bangor, Old Town, the YMCA. We're all kind of in the same boat in that we're trying to figure out guidelines and how we're able to move forward with certain things. And one of the challenges with that, Cheryl, is that the guidelines are really more focused on economic impact and starting the economy again, and less focused on municipal things. And so we're having some challenge getting guidelines or guidance on what we can and can't do, or how the virus is going to affect how we do things. Some things have come out and certainly we have seen that different municipalities are dealing differently and choosing differently how to do things. I know I've talked to Brewer, and they were up in the air on the pool, but I think they were trying to figure out how to do that, and they have a little different pool than we have. Bangor had kept their after school program, which turned into an all-day program, kind of going, but it was really for their own people and for folks that really needed it, and not big numbers, but basically spent a lot of time cleaning and a lot of time doing those things, and have different resource level than we have to be able to do that. And I think Old Town was the same way. They continued to do that kind of care, and they, interestingly enough, the information that I got from them was that they were talking about not seeing a huge increase in numbers, they thought, over the summer, just that they kind of had a low number, 13, 14 kids, and that number was the max that they had, and it was lower than that. So some of the challenges that you look at are really similar across the board, is trying to figure out what's there. We are also looking at how are the schools dealing with, say, athletics, and what does that look like in the fall. We have some guidance that's come out about youth sports, most of which is really skill development right now, which is positive because we can certainly do some of that stuff in smaller groups if that's, as we look to the fall. But like I said, we're looking at, the end of May, and what does August look like? So you know, and I had been doing this since we started this with the pool and some other things. And so it's not a simple answer, but I think we're constantly sharing ideas on how to do stuff. And you know, some folks are doing things differently. Some have gone, you know, I think Farmington had a whole program that they were doing online, which was great. They had the resources to do that, and it was amazing what they did.
I think, yeah, thank you. I think I was thinking more about moving forward, like in September, in October, as a full-time Parks and Rec coordinator. Our municipalities looking at, you know, if kids don't go back to school or, you know, things like that. And I know you're trying to work out, you know, what is a Parks and Rec coordinator going to do if there's no people to do it with, I guess, is what I was wondering is, and how are other municipalities kind of ameliorating that situation? Like, how are they kind of dealing with, what are we going to do next year? What would our Parks and Rec coordinator have to do if there was no Parks and Rec?
Yeah, I think the plan, Cheryl, is that there will be Parks and Rec, that at least what I'm hearing and seeing is a need that the university can't fill, that for us to get a little bit old school and find opportunities for kind of a modified supervised environment as opposed to a highly supervised environment. So back to some of the interactions that can be a little bit more socially distanced. And it's not fancy, it's not taking trips, it's not going to the pool, but I think it's kind of like field day. And I think that what we're hearing from other towns is an awful lot of work is going into what that might look like. And what I know is without that person, we're not going to be able to flip it to be able to do as much as I think what we need to do. I think we'll be in a mode of it's waiting. It's kind of like we're waiting to see if the university is going to be able to provide summer camp on July 1st. And my response is it would be great if they can. And if they can't, I think we need to come up with something working with them to see what we can do off campus here. And I also think price point is important, which is why it's going to have to look unique, and a lot of thought's going to have to go into it.
Sophie, I'd also add that remember that programming is only a smaller part of what Parks and Rec does. With building management, with amenities, trails, all those things still are things that we're seeing, and obviously an uptick in people using because they can get out and do those sorts of things, and are taking a little bit more attention. So
I was against filling this position at the start of the budget, but what I'm starting to feel like is that this Parks and Rec coordinator would give a service in a time when we really people need some help with occupying their kids or getting them outside and running around, or coordinating field days or trail events or something. And so for the $5,000 savings, I am starting to think that maybe filling this position would give the town people an amenity that might actually they can use and feel a little supported, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Cindy. And I would only add to that I just think that, I mean, again, it's a question of $5,000, and it's probably difficult to quantify what the losses could be if we didn't fill it because of the interconnectedness of Parks and Rec with, our economic development sort of plan. I mean, that council is kind of set as a priority, and that the comprehensive plan is set as a priority. Historically, Parks and Rec has just been all about youth sports, youth sports, youth sports. If you think back to like the 80s and 90s, that's what it was for. And it was staffed that way and focused that way. But particularly in a place like Orono, where if we want economic development, we want it to also fit with the community. I mean, this is, this just has been our path and council's sort of vision for this department for years in trying to get economic development in this area ramped up. I would hate to see us take a step back over a matter of $5,000. And I really, I like your point about, this is a tangible thing that, especially those parents who maybe wish we were opening the pool, they might be able to feel a little bit of relief at having some organized activities that kids can participate in this summer.
I agree with keeping the position as it is. I think is a great addition.
Yep, I would agree as well.
I concur too.
I think I'm not needed.
I was going to say so. Sorry, Dan.
The only thing I just want to clarify is we had come to you with a plan to shift Mitch's salary, more of Mitch's salary into the TIF and bring this person on board back in the beginning of May. I've held that. I would like to go ahead and bring this person on board and get them started planning. And it will be no impact on this year's general fund budget. Are we okay with moving ahead with that plan?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so long as it doesn't impact this year's budget, because I worry about shortfall this year.
Me too. If anything, it might help us a little bit this year.
Okay.
So I understand that we're coming up on the 6 o'clock hour, and we've said 2 hours. I know that we have Lori. My understanding is we might lose a counselor. And Lori, when we started the conversation earlier this week, it was 1 full-time vacancy. This afternoon, that turned into another anticipated part-time vacancy. While I apologize for having Lori sit through this whole meeting,
Okay.
I think she and I would much prefer if we could come back, even if it's an abbreviated meeting on Monday. We don't have anything scheduled. It would give us more of an opportunity to talk about this, unless your answer is we don't want to see any service drop in the library and go forth and not fill these 2 vacancies.
I would like to give you guys some time to think about it.
I agree.
I tried. Okay.
Lori, thank you for hanging in there. And also, come on, this is riveting. This is a great way to spend 2 hours.
I've enjoyed it. I always learn something, so I'm cool being here.
It will give us an opportunity to, I had an ability to walk you through a conversation, but I think this will give us an ability to flush it out more and make it more streamlined, if you're all right with that.
Yep.
Okay.
I thank Lori for her patience, but I really think this has been a very productive meeting, and I think a lot of the information you gave us was very good and very helpful.
So, Sophie,
Yes.
I'm not sure where we are with Megan's suggestion, but I have another suggestion. When we meet, maybe not the next meeting, but when we meet in the near future, I would like to see what the impact on the tax rate is, the municipal tax rate, without the shared position in public works and water pollution control. I would like to see what the impact would be if we decided not to fill one of the vacant library positions. And I would like to see what the impact would be if we did not do the Main Street reconstruction project.
Main Street or North Main?
North Main is
North
what
Main.
North Main Avenue. And I have a suggestion on how we might address Megan's concern if people want to do that. I would do it very simply. I'd take the average salary plus benefits of employees in the town, and I would just look at how many employees it would take to get us to a zero impact. I wouldn't bother identifying departments or individuals. I'd just say the average salary for an employee, and I recognize some would be higher and some would be lower, is $50,000 or whatever it is, plus benefits. And in order to get to zero, it would take 13 employees. Does that?
I appreciate that suggestion, Tom. I like the sound of that. I guess, I don't know, maybe I feel a little fired up about some of the feedback, just because, I mean, I said at the beginning of budget talks, I mean, that I was fully committed to not reducing staff because they're
Right.
our greatest resource. And so I think that there might be people out there who even voted for the bond who still think, oh, but you could just cut some people. And I want them to really understand what the impact could be on this community in terms of the reduction of the service level that they expect. And I think your suggestion would probably be helpful for that.
So is that a task that wouldn't be too terribly difficult for staff to do?
Oh, I can do that. And I can also give you a general idea of what. So I will tell you, if you told me to cut X number of people, there are certain things that would be the options that came to you. And I think without saying this is the option, but saying in order to get to that level, you're looking at this combination or this combination or this combination. I think we could do that pretty easily. I mean, if people only knew the degree that we've ripped this budget apart, it's to configure it in different ways isn't all that difficult. I wouldn't say not difficult, but it's doable. And I do get kind of where you're trying to go. So let me do some of that work and we'll see.
Okay.
Thank
Good.
you.
Thanks, Sophie.
Before we go, I do have a very brief town manager's report. We got the bids back on the town office cabling project. That's the putting the Cat 6 cable through the town office to support our IT infrastructure. And as you recall, we are having some major issues with that. And the more we're doing virtual programming and trying to have people work remotely, the more important that has become. We budgeted $20,000 for that. In my budget forecast, I assumed all 20,000 would be spent. The bids came back under budget. So my thought is if we could move that forward, it will come to council on the 13th, but if I can get the paperwork ready for that bid, that award now means we could get the project done in this fiscal year and not have to carry money forward.
Sounds good to me.
So at this point, it would become a confirmation and go on consent.
Yep.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
I see a lot of, okay. We are looking on June 3rd. We're probably going to need to have a special council meeting before our budget workshop. There are 2 items of business that I need you to consider. One, the school needs warrants signed and in for the election, for the budget validation election. And in order to sign them remotely, according to Shelley, we need you to talk about it at a public meeting. And if you just vote on it, it makes it simple. And then we'll have somebody, maybe Mitch, run around and get signatures for you. He's getting awful good at that. I want to make you aware that Dave Mylan and I have been working very closely to try to take the temporary nature of the COVID-19 pandemic and work with businesses to make those accommodations that I think council would support without that having to go into a queue and wait for council to come together to have a public meeting. And my sense from my previous conversations is council is fine with me doing that. I will be honest, it means that I am interpreting the ordinances in a temporary way. One issue has come up that I do not believe I have the authority to interpret differently, and I just want to make you aware because we have a very upset property owner. We have a property owner who was renting to 3 unrelateds. One of those unrelateds is not leaving at the end of her period because she was going to grad school out of state and is not doing that. International student, I believe. And the property owner wanted me to give, wanted the town to just say, it's fine, you can put your 3 new unrelateds in and have your 4th unrelated there, which is a violation of the ordinance. And it's not just a violation of the ordinance, but it is an area that we have fined people for not complying with and for having too many people. And it just that there seems to be a major issue with fairness. So Dave has tried to put her in contact so that the international student could find a different place to live. There are landlords that we know have vacancies. Dave has given some of that information out. We have suggested that maybe one of the people who was going to lease she could refer to one of the places that is empty. So it's not like we're just saying no, but she's not really taking no for an answer. So I just wanted you to be aware that I feel like this is different than letting somebody take up more space in the town parking lot or classifying an extension of a legally non-conforming building as a temporary thing. You know, I mean, those seem like things that you can wipe away and it's no harm, no foul. This seems patently unfair to other landlords, and I just wanted to make you aware of that. I got a complaint today from a citizen very concerned with the shape our gateway signs are in. So I am going to talk with probably Rob Yerksa and Dave Mylan a little bit about how we might be able to temporarily address. I don't know if it's something that some maroon paint and some white paint and going over the letters would make them look better and just leaving the intricacy of Chief Orono alone for right now as we deal with signage, or if it's time to kind of take them down and try to then come back to what we could put up. But the citizen was perfectly lovely in their conversation, but reminded me that businesses get cited if their signs look really, really bad. So had a point. The last thing I want to just make you aware, I've done another one of those discretion things that I think you'll be okay with. I've actually been having conversations with 2 different groups of people. One is headed up by Cammie Carter, and they've got pride sculptures that they want to put out for the month of June. They've asked if they can put one in front of Town Hall. I took the dimensions, I walked the area that they're considering with Chief Lowe today, and we have an area that shouldn't obstruct the visibility for the public safety personnel pulling in and out off the apron, which would be the only thing I'd really be concerned of there. I've given her the okay to let's go ahead and put something there. I'll put something in writing back to her just so she knows we're not responsible for it. And she already knows that. But the other one that I reached out to, Tim Waring and I just happened to be chatting back and forth anyway. And I would be super thrilled to have the town host some of his folk sculpture, his folk art sculpture that he is placing around town. It's kind of cool. And so I have invited him to do that. We just need to talk about where he might like to put it and if he needed some assistance, because I will tell you, I really want the giraffe, and that will take some effort to get. But so I think those types of things, trying to work with people to brighten up our space just a little bit.
I just want to say, Sophie, my neighborhood is next on the docket for receiving those. And if you cut me off, it's not going to be pretty.
I hear you. We'll see. I think you might have more power than I do.
Well,
He was on national news with that.
yeah, Washington Post. It was great.
Yeah.
Castine's picture was in it too.
So with that, I'll go ahead and notice a new meeting tomorrow morning for next Monday at 6. We'll give you some updated budget information, and Lori and I will work on some library information for you.
Okay.
Sounds great.
This has
Thank
been
you.
a wonderful conversation and just makes me ever so thankful that I work for such a great group of people. So thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Sophie. And thank you for putting that overview together too. That looks like a lot of work, but I really like the little graphs and pie charts and stuff.
Yeah, it's very helpful.
It was very helpful.
Take care, everyone.
Thank
Yeah.
you.